Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for coming, and thank you for this opportunity. And most of us are interested in cities. Most of us are interested in economic growth and economic development. So the question is, how do they fit together? And I'm not the first to talk about that, but maybe I'm throwing a new light on it. At least I hope so. Okay, so here's the plot. There are a bunch of points I want to make over the next 45 minutes or so. So economic growth is job number one. Maybe you'll agree with me on that. We hear often that cities are engines of growth. Cities offer the benefits of agglomeration. Can we say more than that? I want to say that people are involved in a bunch of supply chains as buyers and as sellers. And all of us are involved in many supply chains, and I want us, as buyers and as sellers, and I want us to understand supply chains carefully. So because of that, we want two things. We want access to a bunch of things, access and interactions, and we want space. So if you stop right there, you would say that if everybody wants access and everybody wants space, they're trading off. And they're trading off in light of the trade-offs that everybody else makes, because those are the opportunities that are presented to them. So there are many trade-offs made more complex because of many accessibility options, because we access each other these days in more than one way. We get on airplanes, we get in the car, we walk over, we internet, and we talk on the phone, and so on and so forth. Okay, so there's a new literature which talks about, is it proximity or is it networking? And of course it's both. And the question is the blend of proximity and networking that we choose. That's a location problem question right away. And we hear more and more this idea of virtual proximity. And the urban economists and others talk about agglomeration, and that can mean many things. And I'm going to say that, first of all, it's how small firms innovate. Not everything has to be in-house. But the idea of agglomeration includes economies from transacting goods and services, as well as economies from exchanging, nurturing new ideas near and far, which is sometimes specified as tacit knowledge, planned as well as by chance face-to-face contacts. We are interested in both. Both of them matter as we formulate ideas, as we nurture our ideas. Exchange creates value, and that's from Econ 101, and therefore supply chains create value. Complex supply chains emerge. Emerge is an important word in this discussion for things, for ideas, especially for the ideas of entrepreneurs. Emergent, that's another big word here, evolved via human action, less via human design. Firms and people decide what to make versus what to buy. That's from Ronald Coase. That's the big Coasean choice. But how about where to buy whatever they buy? So there's brings our location and city stories into it. They all seek the best sites. All of us, they, us, you, them, seek the best sites from which to execute their plans. And we seek the best sites from which to execute our plans, our consumption plans and our production plans, and therefore supply chain formation and maintenance includes the selection of what I'm going to call propitious sites for each and every person and entity. And therefore cities are the spatial realizations of many, many supply chains. So next time you fly an airplane, you look over the city, it's there. What is it? It's the spatial realization of all of these supply chains as I am presenting and discussing them. And then, of course, in light of all this, what do we do? And maybe that's interesting, maybe not. Okay, so economic growth is the great good, I'm saying. And here's a quote by Deirdre McCloskey, and she says, from 1800 to the present, the average person in the planet, I guess she means on the planet, has been enriched by a factor of 10, some 900%. That's pretty recent, right? And here, these guys are saying the most astonishing thing about the extraordinary growth and innovation that the US and other economies have achieved over the past 2 centuries is that it does not astonish us, right? So here I'm looking around the room and nobody's astonished, right? Here I'm telling you this and you're not astonished, right? And that's astonishing. Okay, and then Steven Pinker says, if everything is getting better, why are people so pessimistic? And the answer is, I don't know, but that would be a lecture in psychiatry, right? So here is a graphic that I like. It may be too small to read. So the point is, here's population growth over many years. Here are all the good innovations that occurred as we get more people. More people is a good thing because more people means, as I've said, more interaction opportunities, more ideas, more advancement. And Jonathan Haidt, no less, Jonathan Haidt is somebody you should know, says this graphic changed his life, okay? So if you study this, this may change your life, maybe not, I don't know. Okay, so here is, here's growth again, and here is a distribution of wealth internationally in year 1, year 2, year 3, and I guess looking at it this way, you could say it's becoming more equal. And that's not something you hear every day either. And then the point of this graphic is that the GDP data that we have does not tell the story. The GDP data that we have does not tell the story because we get so much more stuff at lower and lower prices, often for free. So when you see GDP growth this, GDP growth that, be very careful about what people claim. And then I like this graphic. I found it in a textbook, actually. And technological knowledge, you know, people say the Industrial Revolution. Well, it wasn't manna from heaven. It didn't just come out of outer space, right? It involved actions, institutions, and things that people do. So the way they present it in this textbook is that institutions matter, and there's a growing literature ever since Douglas North won his Nobel Prize, for example, well, maybe before that institutions matter a lot. Institutions are the institutions we have are responsible for the incentives that we respond to, and the incentives that we respond to tell us something about how much physical and human capital comes into play, comes to bear, and then these guys put organization at the center. And organization can mean many things, and I think what they mean in this case is organization is how firms develop, and what kind of firms, what scale of firms, what nature of firms. And what we're doing today is we're saying, how about spatial organization? Okay? So organization is a big deal, of course, and the way organization is often presented is every business decides what to make versus what to buy. And what we're adding here is what to make versus what to buy where. So when we say what to make versus what to buy where, it's the supply chain having a spatial dimension. Okay, and then of course we get new knowledge, and when we get new knowledge we have GDP growth, or better, as I was trying to point out a minute ago. Okay, so I'm going to be name dropping for a bit, and so here's Adam Smith. Adam Smith said, or taught us, that specialization and gains from trade, we each participate in many, many very long, very complex supply chains for goods and services as buyers and sellers. I think I mentioned that. Okay, so again, this is an old idea, but I can't stress it too carefully, right? We all participate in a bunch of supply chains every time we buy and sell. All right, then Schumpeter, I'm name dropping still, added the importance of entrepreneurial innovation. And now I'm saying, okay, what he meant was supply chains for ideas. And supply chains for ideas, I'm going to mention again and again, but we're all here trying to learn from each other. We learn from each other in many ways. When you have a new idea, someday, one day, is there a supply chain behind it? I claim yes, there is. And Ronald Coase, who I mentioned, talked about the evolution of transactions costs. And the evolution of transactions costs affects all these supply chains, and therefore affects where we go, where we locate, where we do business, and therefore affects the nature of the cities we have. Okay, so when I say cities and the evolution of cities, I can make the claim that it involves the evolution of transactions costs. And the evolution of transactions costs goes on before our eyes almost on a daily basis. We do more and more online shopping, for example. We do more and more online information gathering. Not just you and me, businesses around the country and so on and so forth. And so their location choices are heavily influenced by the evolution of transactions costs that are facing them, that are available to them. Okay, so here is our friend Cesar Hidalgo, and I like this quote. So by the way, that's a magnificent book if you have time to read it. He says, in my talks, I often ask the attendees to raise their hands if they used toothpaste that morning. Then I ask the audience members to keep their hands up only if they know how to synthesize sodium fluoride. As you can imagine, all hands go down. So everybody brushes their teeth, but everybody, there's the toothpaste. How to get here, right? What were the actions, what were the ideas, what were the thoughts that came into play? We don't know, and we don't really care. And that's the beauty of it. So here he says, when we're buying toothpaste, we're not simply buying paste in a tube. Instead, we're buying access to the practical uses of the creativity of the person who invented toothpaste, the scientific knowledge informing the chemical synthesis, blah, 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 right? A lot of knowledge. A lot of knowledge brought the toothpaste to us in a very easily accessible form, and we casually use it without thinking about all this stuff as it should be. And that's a sign or a signal to us that something's working pretty well, because we don't fret about, will there be toothpaste tomorrow morning? How in the world will I get it? How will I find it? There's a famous essay that I used to quote to students a lot. It's called I Pencil. I, comma, pencil, right? The speaker says, I'm a pencil, nobody knows how to make me, on and on and on, and goes on and tries to highlight the supply chain at work to creating a pencil. And of course, nobody in this room can make a pencil, I don't think, and, or you might, it would take you an awful long time, and the supply chain to get you the pencil where and when you wanted happened. And you don't have to know about it, you don't have to think about it, it's just there. So those are pencils, never mind 787s, MRIs, and supercomputers, and don't even go there. Okay, so in the graphic, they talk about the proximate causes of economic growth, and in the proximate causes, they say organization, and there's back to the Coasean insight, what to make versus what to buy. How do we decide? Everybody decides that, right? And then what we're adding spatial organization is what to make versus what to buy, but where, okay? So you cannot have a what to make versus what to buy discussion until you consider the location and the costs of getting it from wherever the hell it is and wherever you are. Okay, so what I said we would talk about growth, right? And so growth means what? Well, first of all, in markets, we care about markets at all because markets are where buyers and sellers' plans are coordinated. So the prices that emerge are important to us because of the coordination function. And that's just plain old supply and demand. And so we add to that capital markets. Capital markets, of course, essential too, because we care about economic growth. And so it's the intertemporal coordination between buyers and sellers. So every buyer, every seller has an intertemporal, what's the word I'm searching for? Has an intertemporal consumption smoothing plan, right? Save now, consume later, or vice versa. And again, there are an uncountable number of plans by people, by institutions, by savers, by you name it, that are somehow coordinated. And that's old stuff. And now we're adding, I hope, okay, cities help solve the coordination problems because the inhabitants, all the buyers and sellers in the city, are seeking what I'm going to call propitious locations from which they can profitably execute and interact in light of the many activities, the many supply chains that they participate in. So what I am trying to highlight is the importance of cities and location patterns in this growth puzzle that we're all interested in. So Ed Glaser says, and it's pretty clear to everybody in this room, cities exist to eliminate transport costs for people, goods, and ideas. I'm happy he's putting ideas in there. And then Jane Jacobs says, their intricate order, a manifestation of the freedom of countless numbers of people to make and carry out countless plans, is in many ways a wonder. Okay? So I think that's an insightful statement, and that's the kind of thing that I've been trying to illustrate in these last few minutes. So Jacobs said this in 1961, and here we are, whatever the year is, right? Yeah. Okay, 100 years later. Okay, and these fellows at NYU, they say, metropolitan labor markets in the U.S. are held together by nimble and self-adjusting commuting patterns between self-adjusting residence and workplace locations that ensure that larger cities do not lose their productive advantage because of the added cost of long commuting trips along congested transport networks. Can you understand that? Okay, so I think what they're talking about is strategic co-location of buyers and sellers, strategic co-location of those who are looking for a job and those who are providing a job in ways that are not crazy. Okay? So again, labor markets are held together by nimble and self-adjusting commuting patterns. Self-adjusting is an important insight here, I think. Okay, so you've seen this before. Urbanization goes with GDP, and this is a cross-section that's pretty clear for perhaps the reasons we've discussed. And so Jacobs' intricate order. So again, I think I'm repeating myself, but I'm trying to add to her insight. And to produce things, we're producing, well, the supply chains for things involve new combinations of old things. And the supply chains for new ideas involve how we find new combinations of old ideas. So it's a question of combinations, right? So everything you can touch, everything you hold in your hand is a new combination of old ideas, of old things that somebody has designed. And every idea you have to do that, or every new idea you have to do that, is really a new idea of a bunch of ideas that have been lying around, either in your head or elsewhere. So every time you have an aha moment, it's because in your brain you are combining ideas you've always had in new ways, right? New ideas are new combinations. And combinatorial space is huge, and therefore there's no end to the new ideas that you can come up with. And then here's the racy part of the talk. Here's Matt Ridley saying, I believe that at some point in human history, ideas began to meet and mate and to have sex with each other. Okay, so how many sex talks are there in METRANS? I don't know. But anyway, he's saying an important thing, right? He's saying that it's the ideas getting together to form new ideas. All right, so there are an uncountable number of complex supply chains that are formed and coordinated in a decentralized manner. And all chain participants seek the most suitable sites locations in light of all the supply chains they participate in as buyers and as sellers. Some urban economists will talk about consumption cities, and they'll say, well, people flock to New York because there are consumption opportunities there. Well, perhaps, but of course, we're all consumers, and we're all interested in tapping into the opportunities that are out there. So whether we are at the receiving end or the producing end of these chains is not relevant. The chains are there, that's why the cities are there. Okay, so cities are engines of growth. You've heard that cliche before, and you know, what is meant? And I think I've already said the possibility for efficient spatial choices for many, enabling them to form and maintain the many supply chains in their lives. So again, I think I'm repeating myself, but we're all interested in forming and maintaining the supply chains that matter. We're all forming and maintaining supply chains that matter as we build things or as we think about things. And Webster and Lye said it in 2003, and they said it in a more elaborate way. They said clustering of uses, spatial specialization is an ordering process with an analogous dynamic to the grouping of individual into organizations and firms. Okay, I think I understand what they're saying, but I think what they're saying is kind of the same thing that we're talking about here. Okay, so here are two quotations that I like, and let me read them to you. Here's Ed Glaser again, and he says, a central paradox of our times is that in cities, industrial agglomerations remain remarkably vital despite ever easier movement of goods and knowledge over space. So about 15 years ago, you could buy books that said, Death of Distance. Death of Distance. Communication is so cheap that why the hell would anybody pay to be near anything? So here is Glaser saying that's a central paradox of our times. And here are two other smart guys, Johansson and Quigley, saying when co-location is infeasible, networks may substitute for agglomeration. This possibility of substitution means that small regions may survive and prosper. Okay, I think both thoughts are along the same lines. Are we going to spread out indefinitely now that we have the opportunity, or why not? So the first quote introduces moving goods and knowledge, which is what I think I've been trying to talk about. And the second quote says that there may be two kinds of agglomeration, via proximity and via networks. And I think this is where it gets interesting. This is where it gets interesting. Some of you read the Regional Science Association papers. You read that? Yes, you do. Okay. And the issue that came out, that came in the email the other day, had a whole issue on this. Is it proximity or is it networks or is it both? So I think we're a bit timely. Okay, so here's a map, and here's the Bay Area, and you recognize that, and a bunch of dots, and this says the location of all software establishments in the San Francisco Bay Area in 2013. And I hope you can see the dots, and that's, if you don't count the water, you're looking over about 1,500 square miles. And are they clustered? Are they not clustered? Are they agglomerating? Are they not agglomerating? My ambition in life, well, one of my ambitions, is to create more maps like this. Because look, all of these stock ideas that we've had are challenged by simple maps like this, right? These guys are not, they're all in the same industry, by the way. Not spread over the countryside like margarine. Some of them are paying high rents to be where they are. And they probably have their reasons. And what I'm trying to say is there are many modes of access, right? Sometimes telephone, email, go talk, go look in the person's eye, have coffee, all those things. They're all going on. And they're all traded off by all the participants. So therefore, there are many modes of access, I said that. There are many kinds of proximity. Proximity kind of loses its meaning. There are many densities, this is over a very big area, and there are many kinds of externalities. So when I say externality, I typically mean human capital externalities, right? And the externalities happen, they click, when the people can access each other, but they access each other not necessarily face-to-face, pedestrian access, but many ways, and that's how you get arrangements like this. So here we are, May 2016, and these guys say, urban networks seem to provide a substitute for the benefits of agglomeration. Seem to provide a substitute for benefits of agglomeration. And every time you see the word substitute, you should say good substitute or bad substitute, how good, how bad, depends on the individual situation. So again, these guys are saying, however powerful information technology becomes, the way knowledge and wealth disseminate and are applied depends significantly on the proximity of people. And you would look at the previous map and you would say, what do you mean by proximity? Do you mean Manhattan types of densities? Do you mean Silicon Valley densities? The map was bigger than Silicon Valley. What do you mean by proximity? Okay, well, I said it there. So many kinds of proximity to facilitate the many kinds of encounters that we count on. So Google now put everybody into one big building, which is called the what? What's it called? The Googleplex. What's the matter with you guys? Googleplex, you know that? Okay. Why'd they pay a lot of money to put everybody in one building? Because they are hoping that you will get encounters, you will facilitate encounters that are productive and meaningful, and that's their assessment, that's their gamble, that's their suggestion. So here we are, jobs and job growth by type of employment center, Portland, what's the point here? According to this, the non-clustered employment is the most. Well, not quite. Does it add 200? It does not. Double counting. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so when I say ESO, I mean Emergent Spatial Organization. That's kind of where we're going. Emergent Spatial Organization. So, urban economists, as you know, proxy the advantage of nearby opportunities by using average density data. And I'm going to say that large area averages mislead. And of course, whenever you talk about an average, you ought to be clear about the variances, and the variances in these large areas are going to be very large. So, there are in reality many densities. Network connection density is maybe another kind of density. So there's physical density, there's network connection density, and they all matter to us. In fact, we are aware of all of them, and we trade them off as we decide is best for us. Okay, so industrial organization is what to buy, what to make, is an oldie. Spatial organization is part of that, not separable. And when we recognize transactions cost and consequent spatial organization, we got to think about cities or metropolitan areas. Location choices are made simultaneously along with a growing number of networking choices. So we do both. We do both. And if you look at the urban economics literature, it was all about picking the location depending on access to the job, depending on journey to work. And of course, that's a little bit too simple because according to the story I'm telling you, the location choice that's good for you has a lot to do with the networking choices that you're making. And the networking choices that you're making involve physical access as well as virtual access. Nothing but trade-offs. Okay, the word realize is important because it is not just what are the potential external costs and benefits, but what are they after everybody's found a place to live, work, and site. So if you put all the deaf people near the airport, there's no noise externality, right? So location certainly matters. And so people try to do something about the possible externalities that are facing them. And I think we can go forward. What are these guys saying? Emergence of recent literature about discovering the importance of economic geography might seem paradoxical in a world increasingly dominated by email, faxes, and electronic communications, superhighways. Why should geographic proximity matter when technology has advanced in a manner that drastically reduces the cost of transmitting information across geographic space? The answer is based on a key distinction between information on the one hand and tacit knowledge on the other. Aha. Okay, so go back to the map, the Bay Area map. So we transmit and exchange more than just simple data. We transmit and exchange ideas that may not easily be transmittable electronically. So we all bother to sit in the same room because I could email you or everyone the same slides, and we're presuming that having the discussion, having the person-to-person discussion adds to it. So I could write down for you, this is how you ride a bicycle. Here are the instructions. And we don't know whether when you read the instructions how to ride a bicycle, whether you can ride a bicycle. In fact, many of us have tried to read instructions that have not been so helpful to us, right? So I think we all agree, we all admit that the kind of information that is exchanged has many dimensions, and it includes tacit information which can best be exchanged person to person. And these guys say the same thing. And in this growth discussion, the important player is the entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur is specialized in aggregating dispersed knowledge, here's the knowledge word again, and doing something about it. He's someone who notices something other people do not know, and he or she has to be excited and optimistic about the locality in which to operate, in which all these things happen. So here's the aware entrepreneur, and he or she notices things and proceeds by trial and error because it's never discovering anything on one shot, but it's learning by doing. And when you're in a learning by doing world, then the availability of dispersed knowledge is ever more important to you. What we're trying to say is the dispersed knowledge is available depending on your siting, depending on your location. Okay, so let me move on. Okay, so what have I said so far? I'm trying to replace this word agglomeration that is used so often, and I'm saying we agglomerate for a couple of reasons. We are exchanging things and we're exchanging ideas, which means learning. We're doing it either via a market transaction or by no transaction involved at all. So there are 4 boxes, right? So this box up here is the conventional economic, call them input-output transactions and shipments. We buy knowledge too, and we know of 100 ways to buy knowledge, including going to school. There are, when it comes to things, there are realized externalities in production whereby we get stuff without paying for it. And finally, we get ideas without paying for them. And sometimes people use the word buzz and social networks and on. But I guess there is a reason to go to particular places and cities and sites for all 4 of these. And once we say that, we go to places because we care about all 4 of these, then I think we can get rid of this vague term agglomeration. So we're saying is agglomeration has 4 pieces. When people say agglomeration, there are 4 pieces involved, and I think these are them. These are the ones. Now, let's talk about land use regulation for a minute, or a couple of minutes, because the choice of land uses in my discussion, or the availability of choice of land uses, has come across as being so important as we become productive by participating and forming and maintaining all the supply chains in our lives. Okay, now this well, Glaser says, is there a regulatory middle road? And of course we hope so. But Bill Fischel, I think, has spent a lot of time thinking about the kind of regulation, land use regulation we have, and the kind of regulation, land use regulation we want to have. So here he says, the fundamental premise of this book, his book, is that land use controls are best analyzed as collective property rights under the control of economically rational voters. So the rights and the controls you have don't come out of the air. They come out of a process that Bill Fischel says he understands. And then he says, I regard zoning as a complex property right that is used by a municipality to maximize the net worth of those in control of the zoning process. Again, it's not arbitrary, it's not mysterious, but it's a process that Bill Fischel says we can understand. Okay, he said municipality. Who's the municipality? And here he says, the larger the government unit, the more likely the interest groups will be influential. Because the larger the government unit, the less interested individuals are, individual property owners are, because they may think that I'm just one of many and whatever I say and do is not going to be terribly influential or terribly important. And then he says, the regulations that he's worried about are a post-1970s phenomenon. The tough regulation he's talking about is a post-1970s phenomenon, and he said coinciding with inflations that prompted greater interest in home ownership as a hedge and drove up home prices. So here's inflation. Here are people more interested in the home that they own. It's an ever more essential part of their portfolio, and they are more alert to the property rights they have when they buy and own in a certain neighborhood. And he says you get a new kind of environmentalism, and that environmentalism is I care very much, I'm incentivized to care very much about what happens in my neighborhood. And he calls these guys the home voters. They vote their pocketbook. They vote their pocketbook insofar as they're very interested in protecting the residential property rights that they happen to have. Keep in mind, he's also saying that most Americans, in terms of the portfolio of assets they have, the home is a huge part of it, and because the home is a huge part of their portfolio, they'll invest a lot in maintaining that value, including becoming very involved in the kind of local regulating that goes on. And this is what he calls, what many people call, a bootleggers and Baptists alliance. Okay? So bootleggers and Baptists, the story goes back to Prohibition in America's history, and Prohibition in America's history was came about because of a political alliance, because the bootleggers who had something to gain when legal supply of alcohol was prohibited, and the Baptists who had a spiritual interest in limiting alcohol consumption. So in politics, you always get coalitions. Coalitions win, and he's saying these are the coalitions that happened, and these are the coalitions that won. And so what Fischel is saying, the home voter is part of a similar kind of coalition building and responsible for the regulations, the land use regulations that we have. Okay, so there are some tests we can do, and there are 3 tests, 4 tests we can easily talk about. Let me skip forward. And okay, here's a test which may be interesting. There was a Brookings study in 2006. Lead author was Pendahl, and what they did is they tried to describe the kind of land use regulation that goes on in American metropolitan areas. And they studied the 50 largest metropolitan areas in America, and they surveyed the localities in those metropolitan areas, 1,800 localities, I think. They asked respondents to what extent you implement various, what they call clusters of regulatory measures. And they said there are a variety of effects on metropolitan growth and density from these measures. And then they identified 12 clusters of policies, and they used something called factor analysis that you may have run into before. And here are the clusters. Here are the factor analysis of clusters of policies that they came up with. And if you've done factor analysis, you know that it's an interesting procedure. You've got to name the clusters that the data tell you have. And so they have these, and then they had to name these things, right? And they named these things, and these are their own devices, and then they put them into 4 regulatory orders. They have one they call Wild West Texas. In the footnote they say, Wild West Texas is the closest thing U.S. has to land use deregulation. Anyway, that's what they do. Now, notice a lot of them are what they call traditional. Okay, so what do we do? Well, just by way of background, if you look at their study, you look at these 4 regimes or these 12 clusters, you can easily find data on the metropolitan areas over the last 10 years that became more dense, which is the goal of many of these policies, ostensibly. There's no relationship. There's no link. So the densifying story is more complex. Okay, so does the regulatory scheme explain whether high growth diminishes housing affordability measured by the well-known median multiple? Median multiple is what's the multiple of a median priced house to a median income in this area? And is there a link between housing affordability and what I'm going to call light touch planning? So they have 4 categories from 12 orders. I'm going to reduce it to 2 light touch and not light touch. And the test is for 2 years, the 2005 housing price peak, the 2010 housing price trough. And so there is a peak and a trough table like this. We're categorizing these metropolitan areas where they fall in the affordability, housing affordability continuum, and where they fall into the regulation continuum. And of course, most of the observations are on the diagonal, the fewest are on the off diagonal. So you're seeing something both in the trough and in the peak, essentially very similar, which is the same, which is something you've heard before, and that is that rigidities cause housing affordability problems. The connection between, you also know the connection between land housing costs and land use regulations, huge literature on that. All right, the larger point, it's not just affordability, but it is that supply chain formation and the selection of propitious sites is central to economic growth and is likewise impaired by the kind of regulations that we're looking at. So, what to do? God knows. When it comes to growth discussions, there's something called the Washington Consensus, coming out of Washington, obviously, about what to do, what not to do to get growth, and that says nothing about cities. So we're talking about growth, we want to say something about cities. Labor and capital are generally mobile, and therefore cities and destinations compete. Which ones grow, which ones do not grow, and what I'm trying to say is some of them are more congenial to entrepreneurship and supply chain formation, and the land uses we have are from market forces interacting with regulations. We always have bottom-up as well as top-down forces, and here are these guys again saying, maybe I said this already, productive cities are rarely planned and built from scratch. They evolve, I love the word evolve, from the myriad actions of their inhabitants. They are works in progress, they remain works in progress, responding as indeed they must to new challenges and opportunities. Here is Darren Acemoglu, one of the smartest people on the planet, and he's saying, for every intervention that is on the table, one should do a cost-benefit analysis, not just in terms of economic gains and losses, but in terms of political factors. Of course, one should. And when one should do this, I believe one should discuss the kinds of factors that I've mentioned, and can we do more? Can I do more? I should do more. So whenever I give this talk, somebody says, why don't you do growth regressions? And Jim and I remember our colleague Bob Calaba, right? And Bob Calaba said, regressions are an admission of defeat. Some people love doing regressions. Okay, so I don't want to be too flip about it, but if we do growth regressions, what is the dependent variable? And again, some of you were here when Stolper was here recently, right here in this room, right? What's his first name? Michael, he has a first name, okay. So Michael Stolper talked about his book, which I've not yet read, but which I've been asked to review, so I guess I'll have to read it. And he had an interesting chart about, he had the various metropolitan areas in a two-dimensional scaling, so income growth and population growth. And in that, so he had the various metropolitan areas in those quadrants, and he tried to show that Los Angeles was not looking very good compared to San Francisco when you look at those two quadrants. Now, in his talk, he didn't talk about Houston. Houston was way in the upper right quadrant, where there was a lot of income growth and a lot of population growth. So in his diagram, San Francisco is better than LA, but Houston, which he did not talk about, was even better. Well, San Francisco accommodates a lot of rich people. Houston, growing faster, accommodates a lot of less rich people. That's an interesting point, because if you do some kind of a regression, what do we care about? What are these cities supposed to do? And then when you do regressions, of course, you have inevitable specification challenges. So, you know, next time you see me, if you come back, I'll talk about these regressions in spite of what I just said. So,
you did show a map of San Francisco, but not one of LA. I wonder how you think LA and San Francisco compare in terms of the lightness of the touch, or the successes of aviation, or the networking, or the feature of which you would evaluate the successfulness of it.
well, a la Storper, a la what I just said, I mean, that's the question. What do we call success? And he says, or he said, San Francisco has more growth, therefore they're doing things that LA perhaps should be doing. And I guess what I tried to say is that, well, look, let's say mental experiment, you take 10 million poor people out of anywhere in the world, there are a lot of poor people, and you accommodate them somewhere in America. Now, as soon as you do that, you'd make the world a better place, I think, right? But would they more easily find accommodation in Houston, Los Angeles, or San Francisco? And perhaps not San Francisco. So when you're asking, I guess you're asking the regression question, perhaps. I think that's part of the discussion. But I think it's an interesting point because, you know, international migration is a contentious issue, and there are people who'd be made better off if we could bring them here. Where would we put them, and how and why, and where could we put them? So.
How much of a factor in making these comparisons do you think cost of living is? Because in a city, if the average income's double, but then the cost of living doubles, people aren't that far ahead, are they?
Well, no, but that's the whole point. I mean, as housing becomes more expensive, people get priced out. So can Houston accommodate more people because it doesn't squeeze the cost of living as much as LA does? I think that's a key point. So I think that, you know, when you look at all these growth successes and growth failures, it's, as you say, who can go there and who can afford to go there. And you know, there are good stories about why we want to have the rules and regulations we have, but I think the evidence is pretty clear. They're pricing out a lot of people who can no longer make it here.
A modeling question.
Yes.
So I think one of the lessons I took away from this was that the decisions people and firms make are in such high dimensions. They have got so many unknowns. There's so much that these decisions have to account for incrementally.
Yes.
That really trying to predict them in an aggregate way, from anything aside from sort of the naive empiricism that tracks short-term trends,
Right.
is probably a fool's errand. I mean, that's the way it looks to me.
Right. I mean, as you know, I've not done any modeling on this. And as you know, you and I many years ago tried to do some modeling on this. And when I say emergent spatial orders, emergent is hard to model, or maybe impossible to model. So I think that we can make, absent the kind of models that we're talking about, we can make what they call pattern forecasts without making point forecasts. So I think our whole discussion here has been about pattern forecasts, if you want to use that expression. Where do we put the 10 million people? And the point forecasts I think have been awful. And you know, every time there's a new GDP number, we have that discussion. So, yes, the answer is yes.
As I understand, land use control or zoning are mostly done by local municipalities or local cities. So there will be a lot of variations in land use control in large metropolitan areas. But as you mentioned, many studies still use metropolitan area as the subjects for study. So
Sure.
why do they do that instead of directly doing research on small cities?
Sure, and I think that the paper I'm talking about, but the Brookings people and my paper necessarily aggregate to metropolitan areas. But you're surely right that within metropolitan areas there's tremendous variation. In fact, you know, it might be that measuring the nature of land use control is difficult is the polite word, maybe impossible. Because all these people can, well, these are interviews. The Brookings study is based on interviews. The Wharton study is based on interviewing officials. You can interview officials, you can interview developers, and so on and so forth. But maybe it's like you know, the income tax. Here are the 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 rules, and here's what people actually do at the end of the day. And I think moving from the rules that are on paper and the actual outcomes is very difficult. And if it's too difficult, then this research isn't going anywhere. But I think you're asking a great question.
I guess kind of related to that, what advice would you give to planners and policymakers in thinking about agglomeration and how they could contribute to economic growth in their cities?
Well, again, I mean, the only message I have is that flexibility is a good thing, because inevitably there are many things that the people who make the rules don't know, cannot know. And therefore an open process which is flexible is possibly useful, but that's not simple either.
I have to give a talk at 2, and because I was getting ready for that talk, I called a mutual associate of ours last night, Tom Rubin, to ask some questions. So Tom Rubin used to be the treasurer for the Southern California Rapid Transit District before it combined with the Los Angeles County Transportation Commission to form what is now the MTA. So he's very knowledgeable about transit resources and transit issues, and I said I don't really understand fundamentally why the MTA board seems so indifferent to bus transit ridership. If I look at the projects they approve, and I look at the record of those projects, and I just don't get it, because they're behaving as planners, right? They've got staff planners assisting them. They're political decision makers, but they're entertaining exactly the question that you asked, Peter, and I don't understand their answer. And Tom said they're not ignoring bus ridership; they're trying to destroy it. Right? They are in the business. If you look at the board, it's strictly political economy. They are in the business of acquiring projects for their constituents. That's what their role on the board is. It's not providing transit. It's providing projects for their constituents. So I think what should we do and what we actually will do are controlled by, will be different as long as we've got the wrong set of incentives in place. So I think the MTA board is being perfectly rational, logical, meeting their objectives and their mission, right? Unfortunately, their mission is not moving a lot of people via transit. So I'd clean up the incentives. Other question? Professor Banner.
So this business about the earlier question about the intra-metropolitan variations. So we all know about the famous solution space. Is there any research on that? Did the Brookings or the official looked at that? Should sort of easy measures for that, sort of the metropolitan fragmentation measure, which would be an indicator of the choices people have room for.
Well, the short answer
Linear regression, would you include that?
Right. Short answer is I don't know. The long answer is, again, maybe you know more about this than I do, but, I talked to our colleague, Alan Coton, who I guess you know, who deals with these people on an everyday basis, and it's not simple to look at the rules that are on the books and to get to the outcomes at the end of the day. And I think if we knew the answer to that, we'd have an easier time of it. But I think, these guys, the Brookings guys, they interviewed, 1,800 jurisdictions. They then aggregated into metropolitan areas. And you could say that's a fool's errand. You could say they shouldn't be doing that because the variation within metropolitan areas is much too big. So maybe what we're after, this index of regulatory whatever it is, maybe that's a fool's errand. I mean, I'm happy to admit that. Not happy, but I'm prepared to admit that. Maybe it's just too difficult to measure and find out. We had a student, right, who tried to do this. Forgot his name, who interviewed the local jurisdictions and tried to find out what is it that they do in terms of land use control. And I'm not sure he got to the bottom of it. And I'm not sure what you would do, but, interesting topic.
Well, thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.